Hi, and this is now the sort of next chapter, but we're also in week 5 here. And we're looking at, in this particular chapter, we're going to look at social interaction and social structures of what makes up our society the way it is. And of course, every culture and every society will be a little bit different this way, but these structures are very consistent. We're also going to look at the theorist's sort of view on social structures and social interaction. We're going to touch on a couple of them. And in addition to that, we're going to look at social institutions, looking at the overall society and the structure of it, of which one part of this overall society is social institutions. And these are not necessarily consistent across all cultures, but there will be some similarities. So we're going to look at what are the social institutions. We're going to look at statuses, or status. What is it? How do we gain it? And what is the significance of it? We're going to look at roles. What does that mean in society to have roles? What's the value of these roles? And are there problems potentially associated with taking on roles? And then lastly we'll touch on would be, from a sociological perspective, what are groups and what are the two primary forms of groups in society that sociologists look at and study. Alright, so I hope this is useful, and carry on, and good luck with your studies.
Okay, looking at social structure and social interaction, they're both very critical components of everyday life. At the micro level, now remember, micro level is at the face-to-face, macro is at the bigger picture, looking at the bigger picture of all social society. So at a micro level, social interaction is the process by which people act towards or respond to each other. And this is the foundation of meaningful relationships in society. Now remember, social interaction, if you think about your family, you've had an awful lot of that social interaction with them. And it's what makes them so important, because you understand so much about them, the dialogue and the nonverbal communication, and we'll get in that as well a little later. Now, at the macro level, you look at social structure, and social structure is the stable patterns of social relationships that exist within a particular group or society. Now, by way of an example, what you're seeing there is the government of Canada. You're seeing families, the economy, education. These are examples of social structures. These are social relationships. They're patterns that are stable in society based on the relationships between people and their interaction of those structures and the rest of society. This structure can include social institutions, it can include groups, statuses, roles, and norms. Now, some of this we're going to look at in a little bit later. So if you look, for example, at homelessness, it's produced from both social interaction and social structure. That is to say that people who are homeless have far fewer social interactions with a far fewer variety of people than do those people who are living in homes and are thriving. And they have less access to the social structures that you and I have access to on a regular basis. Okay, so let's break down and look at this a little bit from a couple of theories' perspective. We'll begin with functionalism. And with functionalist theory, basically, they're looking at the role of social structures as being the link between order and predictability. Now remember, this is a theory that likes to see motion or any change that occurs to have it happen slowly, and they look at the roles and norms in particular as the glue that holds societies together. And so some of the essential parts of the components of the functionalist perspective is social institutions as a part of social structure, groups, statuses, roles, and norms. Now, social structure is necessary because it creates this order and predictability in society, and that's something that's very important from a functionalist perspective. In part, responsible for the creation of our sense of self and our self-concept. It's because of these social institutions like school, like government, like family, that contribute to us learning about ourselves through socialization. And this social structure also gives us the ability to interpret social situations that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. So from a functionalist perspective, social structure is very important for people to gain a sense of who they are, how they interact with the social institutions around them, and with one another. Now, by way of sort of showing an alternative view, conflict theory views things a little differently. Now, when they look at social structure, they think of the limits that social structure can have on our options and how it places us in arbitrary categories that are not necessarily of our own choosing. Now, remember, part of the from a conflict theory, the primary structures in society are predominantly economic production. Society generates work, employment, as well as consumerism and spending. And that's this economic production. So the social structure thus reflects a system of domination among categories of people like owners versus employees. And so some have and many have not. Now, in Marx's language, he used the terms bourgeois and proletariat. Proletariat being people who sell their labor, workers. If you are hired by somebody to do work for them, you are part of the proletariat, which is, if you know about the social movement of the 1%, that was to suggest that 1% of the population controls the large part of the resources, and workers are part of the 99%, if you will, who work for a living and really don't generate as much resource and spending power. So from a conflict's perspective, creating these boundaries is what defines which person or groups will be the insiders and which groups or people will be the outsiders. And so it's quite a bit different perspective when you look at just those two theories that look at things at a macro or a big scale perspective. Now, this is an image you find in your textbook, and just want to remind you, in terms of society, this top block in the chart is a large social grouping that shares the same geographical territory and is subject to the same political boundaries, political authorities, and dominant cultural expectations. And some of these important components of a society, of the social structure of society, are social institutions. You see them on the left, both the traditional and the emergent. Groups, you see them towards the bottom, primary and secondary. Statuses, you see ascribed, achieved, and master. And roles, they are a part of these statuses. And norms, which would be the guiding principles or guiding behaviors, as tells us how we're supposed to do things in any given society. Now, status is a socially defined position in a group or a society that's characterized by certain expectations, rights, or duties. Now, statuses exist independently of the specific people, occupying them. So if you are assuming the role of teacher has a status in society, a rank, if you will, a placement. You might place a doctor ahead of a teacher. And so that's the status that it holds. And so status is not the person, it's the position. And every role in society has some status. And these status positions have expectations, rights, and duties associated with them. And how a person who assumes that status, that role, performs their role will either meet the status level, exceed it, or underachieve to it. Now, sociologists use the term status to refer to all socially defined positions, whether they are high or low in rank. Now, there's a term that's used that's called status sets. Now, status sets are made up of all the statuses that a person occupies at a given time. Now, for example, I'm a brother, I'm a father, I'm a teacher. So these are different statuses that I have, and this would become part of my status set. You all have your own status sets, and many of them will be different from each other, based on the different things that you're a part of. Now, if you notice there, you'll see under statuses, ascribed status and achieved status. Now, ascribed status is a social position conferred at birth. That is, you don't choose it. It's who you are, a part of who you are at birth. This could include your race or ethnicity. As you grow older, it's your age, and it can include your gender. Now, it's based on attributes over which you have very little or no control of. Now, as opposed to the alternative, which is achieved status, this is a social position a person assumes voluntarily and as a result of personal choice or of merit or of direct effort. Now, that could be an example of the job that you take, the education that you pursue, the income you earn based on the work that you do. Ascribed status has a significant influence on the achieved statuses that we occupy. That means where you are born and with whom you are born to within your family can have a big impact into what opportunities are available for you to gain in your achieved status. And these opportunities would be described as life chances. Education is a life chance, career or job is a life chance, income, access to resources, these are all things that if you have access to them, give you better opportunities or life chances to succeed in other elements of your life. So if you are a person based on your ascribed status that was born into a family of low income, you lived in a neighborhood of other low income people, it probably offers you less opportunity for the extended education beyond high school if you've completed high school, to high paying jobs where you make a lot of money and have access to a lot of resources. Master status, we'll see in a minute, and in fact I'll do that now. This woman here is somebody who has a master status. Now, if you look at her there, you may have some assumptions about who you think she is and what you might think she does. Now, you might look at her and say she's somebody's grandmother. She seems to be a nice old lady. Now, a master status is what is the most important status that a person occupies. It dominates all of the individual's other statuses and is the overriding ingredient in determining a person's general social position, whether they be poor or rich. It's part of their master status. Now, if I show you who her job is, she's a Chief Justice. Her name is Beverly McLaughlin, and her master status is of something that perhaps you don't recognize from the first picture that I showed. Now, status symbols, well, these are material signs that inform other people of a person's specific status. So, for example, in this picture, the robes that she wears is a status symbol. It represents that she's a Supreme Judge of Canada, and that's what those symbols represent. Now, maybe you're wearing a wedding ring. That's a symbol that represents that you're married to somebody. You have a person that you're committed to in your life. Someone drives by and you see them driving a Rolls Royce, you might ascribe a certain awareness about what that status symbol represents to them. Okay? Alrighty, let's carry on then and move into this next segment that is also looking at structures in society or components, and we're going to look at roles. Now, that's not the right role, but we're going to look at roles. Now, a role is a set of behavioral expectations associated with any given status, and it's dynamic. That just means that it doesn't remain the same all the time. It can change, and it can be performed, the role can be performed in different ways by different people fulfilling those roles. Okay, now let's look at some categories of roles, and we'll begin with role expectation. Now, this is a group's or a society's definition of the way a specific role ought to be played or ought to be pursued. It may sharply contrast with role performance. Now, role performance, this is what the person actually does. Now, in a perfect world, everybody would meet role expectation. Do what you're supposed to do. But of course, we're all individuals, and some people will either outperform role expectation or underperform expectation. This overperformance or underperformance would be a part of role performance. So role expectation is the job description. Role performance is what you actually did. Now, another term that's used within roles is role ambiguity. And this is when the expectations associated with the role are unclear, or when the status is relatively new or is unacknowledged by a society. So, for example, when we first started to see the onset, if you will, the beginning of single-parented families, there was some role ambiguity. That is to say, we didn't really know what to expect. Women, particularly in that role, were uncertain how to perform and run a family where you were a single person. Domestic partners, homeless person, these all have role ambiguity. What is a person in those roles supposed to behave like? What is the role expectation for a single mom, for a homeless person? And so when we look further at what other dynamics that can occur within roles, we find that we could see role conflict. And this starts to occur when incompatible role demands are placed on one person by two or more statuses held at the same time. A woman whose roles include full-time employee, mother, wife, caregiver of an elderly parent, and community volunteer will run into what we would call role conflict. This having multiple tasks, multiple responsibilities, something's got to give. To resolve the problem, we may prioritize our roles or compartmentalize our lives. And this is getting more and more true for more and more people as we take on more and more responsibilities. Now, as a result, we may experience role strain. And this is where incompatible demands are built into a single status that a person occupies. A doctor in a public clinic who is responsible for keeping expenditures down and providing high quality care simultaneously. Now, there's lots of jobs where you might be asked to do more and varied activities as a part of that responsibility, and that's where this role strain has been coined in regards to roles and how we perform them in our society. And then lastly is that some roles we role exit. And this is when a person disengages from a social role that has been central to their identity. So for example, if you've been incarcerated for a long period of time, your role was that of convict. When you exit that, you become an ex-convict. It doesn't make necessarily what you need to do and your responsibility any easier. It means you are adjusting by leaving one role that was central to who you identified yourself as being and enter into another role. People who were in religious communities, nuns who leave the religious community, retirees. When you've been working all your life, whether it be for one employer or many employers, when you leave, you role exit. And sometimes that provides another degree of ambiguity. Divorced men and women, leaving a family or leaving a relationship becomes role exit. Now, role exit occurs in 4 stages. Generally, you have some doubt within the role that you're in. Secondly, you search for some sort of alternative. 3 is the action stage, or you actually depart the role. And 4 is the creation of a new identity. And many of us will go through that on more than one occasion in our lives. Now, the other point that we should make on that chart we saw earlier was that about the 2 types of groups. And we are all a part of many of some of these 2 groups, usually one in particular, and that is the primary. This is something that we might describe as our family, close friends, school, work, and peers. These are smaller groups. They're very specialized. Your family is very specialized. It's where you grow up. It's not where you work. The members in this group of your family or your friends or your work peer group, they interact face to face a lot, and they tend to do this interaction over a long period of time. Now, social groups consist of 2 or more people who interact frequently, who share a common identity and a feeling of interdependence. Now, if you are a part of the secondary group, well, a secondary group is larger. It's much more specialized. The family group isn't that specialized in that I think I misspoke earlier. It's less specialized. The secondary group is very specialized. I work at the college. My job is very specialized. I teach. I teach online, and so it's highly specialized compared to what I might do within my family. Group members engage in more impersonal, goal-oriented relationships. As much as I interact with many people that I work with, we all have a common goal about what we are trying to accomplish over the course of 14 weeks and over the course of 2 semesters each year. The impersonalness of the dialogue is usually more about, well, they're not family, so there's things that I don't share with my coworkers that I would share with my close friends and my family. And so you find that secondary groups will be the schools, churches, military, corporations, and many larger workplaces that you're involved in. Now, these are the 2 primary groups that exist. Now, there are things called a social network. And this is not exactly like what you're imagining, but let me say by definition, it's a series of social relationships that link individuals to others. Those you look to for support, emotional or personal support, and shared interests and activities. And now with homeless people, we'll find that they have few social networks, and they're separated from family and friends and have an increased isolation. Social networks are the people that you would rely on when things are maybe problematic or troublesome and you need someone to talk to. You would rely on somebody in your social network. Now, we will talk about another form of group, if you will, or called formal organizations. We'll touch on that in another chapter. And these are highly structured groups formed for the purpose of completing certain tasks or achieving specific goals. This could be, for example, post-secondary, like Georgian College, could be government, could be corporations. But this is something we'll cover in a chapter. I believe we'll be doing that in week 11, 12, or 12, 13. Now we'll look at a couple of theories again, just in terms of groups then. First of all, we're going to look just to remind you that the social institutions then are typically family, religion, education, government, economy as being the traditional ones, but then we have others that have been emergent. Now the functionalists, they look at, the role of the family group, as having, and what are these social structures and institutions will have on family and education, on the economy. So what you see on the left side would be social institutions, and what you see on the right side is the function, these social institutions. So you have structure and function. And so they view these social institutions as having a very specific function in helping within society. Now, alternatively, you look at conflict theory again, and you're seeing conflict theorists will argue that many institutions don't fully fulfill these functions very well. Homeless people lack the power and resources to promote their own interests when they are opposed by the dominant social institution. I mean, who do they complain to get more fair treatment or to get better supports that meet their specific needs, as opposed to the needs being met that the corporation or the government thinks they need? The urban renewal is good for the wealthy people, but it takes away affordable housing for marginalized people, leaving them without homes. If you look at the downtown Toronto, I was just down there this past weekend, and you see what's called gentrification. That is taking up older, more affordable residential or housing apartments, taking them down and building new apartments for more wealthy people. And it reduces the prospects for people who are in need and pushes them out to the fringes of society. Okay, that is looking at social interaction and social structure. What we'll do next, in next week, we'll be looking at this same chapter, but we're going to be looking more at collective behavior and social behavior. All right, so carry on and keep up the good work, and look forward to next time we get together. Bye now.